Welcome everyone to this another episode of Unlearning the False. No, we have already finished that series. Sorry, Force of Habit. This is another series that we are starting. We have started rather. The name of that series is The Ancient History of Bharat. Okay, there are multiple scholarships out there. You can refer to any given scholarship that convinces you or persuades you. Okay, but the fact of the matter is there were deliberate and purposeful efforts that were made by the people in the West to keep us away from our roots, to not let us reclaim our identity. Okay, that itself should tell you the entire edifice of coloniality, because majority of these authors were white. Okay, only after the excavations in 1922 and earlier parts, I would say from the latter part of 1700s and 1800s, they started discovering these things, that there were scriptures and there was a lot to Bharat than just exploitation. Okay, so that is, I keep on reminding my viewers this, that you cannot rely on the you cannot rely on the intellectual honesty of the whites to tell you the truth about your land, about your people, about your history. Okay, as a matter of fact, even the maps that we have right now of ancient Bharat were drawn by the British. That is something that I discovered very recently, and I was slightly taken aback that why exactly, or why aren't efforts being made to draw these maps on our own. But that is again a discussion for some another video, and not for me at least, because there are people who are far more qualified to discuss these things than me. Okay, I'm just simply a student of history who is raising some questions that go unanswered from our school and education system. Okay, so today we are going to focus on chapter number 11, that is the Indo-Iranian relations. Again, a word of reminder for you: Indo or India is a misnomer. Okay, because the time about which we are going to discuss, or we are discussing, okay, during that time there wasn't a word named India, or whatever. Greek might have a word called Inde, but it was not specifically used to denote the geography of Bharat. Okay, and I've also mentioned this in my previous one of my previous videos, that India as a word is used to denote or connote to a place where the gospel of the Bible has not spread, where the pagans are living, and it is a playground for the monotheistic people to convert others. Okay, that is the place that they refer to as India. Hence, when Columbus reached USA, he rejoiced and joyfully said, "Red Indians, this is the land of Red Indians." Okay. All right. So just a quick recap. According to the West, the original Aryans, they descended from the mountains, from the Nordic, okay, the Scandinavian and the Nordic countries, or any country from the Western Europe. As long as it is from Western Europe, they are fine with it. So they came from over there, from there onwards, all the way to the northwestern frontiers of Bharat, that currently we call that as Pakistan and Afghanistan. They came up until that land. So all this while, there were no splinter groups amongst the migrating Aryans. Okay, it is only after reaching over here and staying here for centuries and developing a superior culture, it is only after that that there was a splinter group that they like to call it as Indo-Aryans. Okay, so just a word of caution: if you are a native, for you, the truth must be that nobody came from outside over here. Okay, it was our Aryan forefathers who developed that civilization, who developed every conceivable aspect of human knowledge. Okay, and then it spread outwards. This should be the bottom line for you. Doesn't matter what the West tells you, doesn't matter what the Western scholars may come up with multiple research papers and theories. That's not the truth, because they have an inherent bias. Okay, so yes, but according to them, they traveled all along to the current day Pakistan and Afghanistan, and then there was the first split. Okay, after traveling so much, after conquering so many lands, first split came in the form of Indo-Iranians, and those people started migrating westwards. Okay, the population of the current day Iran is supposed to be the descendants of this, Indo-Iranian splinters of the Aryan homeland. All right, that is again an assumption. There is no conclusive evidence to corroborate this. All right. So this is chapter number 11. R.C. Majumdar writes, it is also quite clear that the Aryan principalities appearing about 1400 BC in Mesopotamia and Syria were the successful creation of a group of condottieri and their troops who had detached themselves from the main body, while the wandering tribes passed through the eastern Iran towards Bharat. Okay, there are also some theories that say no, there were some splinter groups as well. Okay, some splinter groups, they settled in Mesopotamia and Syria before reaching the geography of Bharat. Okay, so according to them, they believe that the Aryans, they started migrating from the European continent eastwards. Okay, some of them settled in Mesopotamia, hence Mesopotamia is an ancient civilization. Some of them, they settled in Syria, hence it is, as Syria is an ancient civilization. Some, they kept on moving eastwards, and finally they reached the current day Pakistan and Afghanistan. From there again there was a splinter, and then some of them migrated to Iran. This is their belief. Okay, why? Because they need some stake to the Aryanhood, because Aryanhood is very attractive to them, because it was the epitome and peak of the human intellectual, spiritual, and physical development, and hence they had to stake some claim to it, because during those times they were the ones who were considered superior race. Hence they cannot stand to not have some claim to that Aryanhood. Okay, but again, all these things are just self-fulfilling assumptions upon assumptions. Since we assume this, hence this must be true, hence again we also can assume this. So it all goes round and round, but in the end it's all a big fat lie. Next is the undivided Indo-Iranians passed a long time in their Central Asian common home. Here, undivided Indo-Iranians passed a long time in their Central Asian common home, for here grew up a specific Indo-Iranian culture and religion that may be reconstructed at least partially by comparing the Veda and the Avesta. Okay, I'm still not sure. I tried to do some digging into this word Veda. Why exactly do we call it Veda? Is it mentioned anywhere? Why do we call it Rig Ved? What does the word Ved mean? From where does the word Ved come from? Okay, so I tried to dig a little bit deeper, but I was not able to spot the primary sources. But if anybody of you who is watching this video can shed some light on the etymology of the word Ved or Vedas or Vedic, please, you can do that in the comment section. But yes, it is said that in some parts of the Central Asia, before dividing into, before the single unitary Aryanhood, when it was split into the Indo-Iranians, before that they stayed somewhere in Central Asia. Where? Don't exactly know. Okay, and it was here that there were some germs and seed of split being sown. Right, you will also see there are striking similarities between the religion of the Parsis, that is the Zoroastrianism, and the ancient Aryan faith. Okay, a seat of culture was probably matriarchal, meaning likewise currently Bharat as a civilization is usually criticized by the West, and this is something that gets them off, is that since Bharat is a patriarchal civilization, hence everything that is bad about the culture of Bharat has to be blamed on the patriarchal mindset. But the single unitary Aryanhood that existed was matriarchal. That is something for you to think about. Okay, so how do you reconcile these arguments? Okay, there are some narratives that are pretty much prevalent in our public discourse regarding the history and regarding the history of the identity of our people. But then a rational mind should ask these questions. Okay, For there is nothing to show that the Vedic Aryans of India maintained an active cultural relation with their brethren in Iran. See, these are all just concocted lies. So all these things that were taught to us in the form of history, in the form of ancient history, is just, you know, it's like a palace of cards. Okay, it's a lies upon lies upon lies upon lies. Okay, so for which there is no conclusive proof about any given thing. So there is nothing to show that the Aryans of Bharat maintained an active cultural relation with their brethren in Iran. So if indeed there was a single Aryanhood and the first splinter from that single Aryanhood was the Indo-Iranian people, then why exactly did not they maintain an active cultural relation? Okay. This is what R.C. Majumdar writes on page number 222 in chapter 11. For there is nothing to show that the Vedic Aryans of Bharat maintained an active cultural relation with their brethren in Iran. So, in the earliest, this is again, he writes, in the earliest days, the Aryans of Bharat must have been connected with the Aryans of Iran, either as friends or as foes, but actual historical contact cannot be asserted with any degree of probability. Okay? You might be a useful idiot and believe in these narratives of the West, okay, that indeed Aryans came from outside. Okay? Then this is a question for you to ponder upon, that if indeed they came from outside and if indeed the people, the Aryan race split and then some of them went and settled to Iran, then why haven't they exactly maintained historical contact? There's something for you to think. The two peoples turned their backs upon each other, as it were, and developed their distinctive civilizations, apparently without the least mutual influence, although in language, culture, and religion, their similarity in the earliest period was little short of identity. So, R.C. Majumdar says that there was complete difference between these two sets of people. So, if indeed they split from each other, there has to be some degree of similarity, some degree of congruence between their cultures. But according to him, there isn't. When later in history, under the Achaemenids, Greeks, Bactrians, and the Sakas, the Iranians and the Aryans were forced to meet as citizens of the same empire. They met as complete strangers, not as cousins of the same family. So, if indeed this narrative of the West, that from the single Aryanhood, the Iranians split and went to settle down in some other part, but when they meet under these, the Achaemenids, Greeks, Bactrians, and the Sakas, because it is taught to us in the form of ancient history in school that there were a set of rulers who came from Iran and those side that were known as Achaemenids, Greeks, Bactrians, and Sakas. So why have they been referred to as complete strangers? There has to be some sort of cultural continuity, but there isn't. So how do you explain this split theory? Again, you would have to explain it if you buy into the narrative of the West, whereas you will not need an explanation if you believe that Bharat is the original homeland of Aryanhood and nobody came from outside. Again, page number 224. The fact that about 1400 BC in the well-known treaty record discovered at Bogaskai, the Daiva gods Indra and Nasatya appear side by side with the Asur gods Varuna and Mitra clearly suggests, as Christensen, again a white scholar, has pointed out, that the antagonism between the worshippers of the Daiva gods and the Asura gods, which is the central feature of early Indo-Iranian history, had not yet broken out. Alright, so there were these two groups of gods. Okay. If you ask a commoner or a lay person right now, what does the word Asur mean? Okay, they would tell that somebody who is evil or devil is Asur. But what if I tell you Asura in the ancient time, that word means a lesser god or a god, somebody who is equivalent to God, who was Asur. Okay, so there was a split between people. Some of them, they worshipped the Asuras. Okay, that in contemporary vernaculars right now we call devil, but during those times they were gods. There were others who worshipped the Devas, meaning again gods, but there has to be some difference. Alright. So according to him, R.C. Majumdar, during the 1400 BC, In the well-known treaty record discovered at Bogaskai, so these two gods they appear side by side, but according to major sources of the history, okay, there was classical animosity between these people, between the worshippers of the Asuras and the worshippers of the Devas. But according to the artifacts discovered at Bogaskai, they appear to be together. Asuras and Devas they appear to be together. So how do you explain this? How do you reconcile these two arguments? Again, something for you to think. I am no historian. I am no scholar. If there is somebody who is a historian and a scholar watching this, the comment section is open. Feel free to exercise your freedom of expression and explain how do you reconcile these two arguments. Again, a white scholar comes out and says, Christensen has suggested that the Asura religion was practiced by more cultured and steadier elements of the primitive Indo-Aryan society. Meaning, these people who were equivalent to the gods, they were also worshipped by people who were more cultured. Okay, whose chief occupation was agriculture and cattle breeding, while the older Daiva religion continued to find favor with the more vigorous but less civilized portions of the people to whom the primitive predatory habits were more congenial. The former were content to remain behind in Iran, but the latter, urged by the spirit of adventure, advanced farther east and at last entered Bharat. Okay, so still they are even not convinced. They are not even willing to concede that the split that occurred, okay, in the single unitary Aryanhood, the split that occurred, that was before reaching the geography of Bharat. Okay, so up until now there was, some, I would say, barbaric savages living. There were still hunter-gatherers living in Bharat. They have still not come up until Bharat. There were definitely races of people who had arrived here, but there was no civilization according to the West. Okay. And in India, we meet with curious situation that in the oldest period, all the great gods received the title Asur. This is something that might come across as a shock for the, contemporary people in Bharat, because in the ancient Bharat, okay, Asur was a title that was given to gods. Okay, so how do you reconcile with this popular narrative that Asur is somebody who is devil and Dev is somebody who is supposed to be God? Who's to say this was not a false narrative? Who's to say there wasn't any malicious intent behind leading us on to believe that Asur indeed means a devil? That is something for you to think. And in India, we meet with the curious situation that in the oldest period, all the great gods received the title Asur as a decorative epithet, though later it came to be used exclusively as a term of abuse. Okay. In innumerable passages in the Brahmanas, the Asuras have been represented as superior to the Devas in the arts of civilized life. So, this is again a very great misconception among people. From where does the word Brahman come from? They are essentially commentaries on the, smritis that have survived from earlier, that we like to call as Rig Veda and all. Okay, those are basically smritis, collection of hymns. Okay, like I said, I am still digging onto this word Ved. Where did this word come from? Vedic age, Vedas, Rig Ved. So I don't exactly know. Okay, but yes, those are collection of hymns, and in those and in the commentaries on those collections of hymns, those written texts are called Brahmanas. And in those, Asuras are given more importance than the god themselves. Okay. So again, you should think, where does this belief of Asura being synonymous to devil come from? In innumerable passages in the Brahmanas, the Asuras have been represented as superior to the Devas in the arts of civilized life, and both in Vedic and Puranic tradition, they are regarded as elder brothers of the gods. Okay, they are as far above the Dasas and the Rakshasas as the Devas themselves. So they are the supreme. Okay, so this should really be an interesting study for you to really find out why exactly do we believe so, or how has this perversion of the word asura come about. Okay. Next up, on page number 225, R.C. Majumdar writes a pretty lengthy paragraph to explain this. The earliest Indo-Aryan society too, like the earliest Indo-Iranian society, was therefore not quite homogeneous culturally. It was predominantly, but not exclusively, Daivic, while the contemporary Iranian society was predominantly Asuric. All right, so all these um, gods, such as I would say Indra and Nasatya, they were considered as Asuras. Who are the Devas? Varuna and Mitra. These two are the conventional, in the contemporary understanding or the contemporary definition of the god, is somebody who is nice. So in those times, Varuna and Mitra were those gods. Whereas Asuras, the contemporary definition of Asura is somebody who is devil, somebody who is evil. But in those days, Asura was used for the people Indra and Nasatya. So according to our scriptures, according to the Aryan scriptures, Indra is a Asura. Okay. So let's see. I mean, you can do your own due research. You don't have to take my word for it. Okay, this is R.C. Majumdar saying it. Here is, after a period of conflict and adaptation, there was peace, which proved successful to the extent that even the foremost of the Daiva gods, namely Indra, not only came to be regarded as an Asura in the oldest part of Rigved, but was also credited with possessing Maya, which was a special property of the Asuras and probably signified magical power. Okay. So I don't know, again, according to this book, in the later part, after a prolonged period of conflict and adaptation, there was suddenly a peace between Asuras and Devas. Okay, here you can I'll go out of the track and bring in the theory of that, that churning of the ocean. Maybe that could be the event that could signify this. Okay, because suddenly, after years and years of war, there was an armistice, okay, a peace treaty. So Asuras and Devas managed to come to a standstill and negotiated an armistice. Okay, and from this point forwards, we don't exactly know the date of this. There is no date stamp on this, but from this point forwards, the lines between these two, the Asuras and Devas, was blurred. Okay, the powers were interchanged. All right. It is hardly an accident that in the Hindu mythology, the architect of the gods is an Asura whose name is Maya, and the rude Daiva worshippers apparently regarded the superior arts and crafts of their rivals as achieved by magic. So this is something for you to ponder about. How has this perversion come about? And if indeed this is a perversion, then what exactly are we supposed to believe about our gods? Okay. Now what happens is, since we are talking about the Indo-Iranian split, okay, there were some people who split from the single unitary Aryanhood and they went to Iran, or settled down in Iran rather. Okay. So R.C. Majumdar, on page number 225, he states, in his Gathas, Zarathustra condemns in bitter terms the festivities at which the Daiva worshippers, inebriated with soma, offer bloody sacrifices to their gods, extinguishing amidst shouts of revelry the life of innocent bull. Alright, Zarathustra, he is supposed to be the founder of the Parsi faith. Now, like we have Smritis and Samhitas, the Parsis have Gathas. Okay. So in those Gathas, okay, Gatha is also a word that is used in Hindi, I guess, if I'm not incorrect. It's a synonymous to stories. Okay, ye Gatha, wo Gatha. It's like a story. All right. So their scriptures are called Gathas, and in there he mentions, or he criticizes people for drinking soma and then doing sacrifice. Okay. Now, sacrifice, according to majority of the Western scholars and some of the native scholars agree as well. Animal sacrifice was part of the Aryan culture. Okay. So, whole sacrificial cult leaves no doubt that the Aryan and the Avestan ritual are one and the same origin. So, because it was prevalent in both these lands, so there has to be some striking similarity. Okay. Now, let's see. This is quite interesting that I discovered. The ceremony of Upanayana is practically the same in the Veda and the Avesta. That is the Gathas that are written by Zarathustra. So, how do you explain this then? Earlier, we were being told that there was no historical connection between the ancient, Aryans and the people who settled down and are supposedly have or are supposedly said to be the splinter group from Aryans. Okay. Now, in the few, or let's say a few centuries later, we see there are striking similarities between the texts, between the gods, between the texts, between the vocabulary and idioms, and even the ceremony of Upanayana. Okay, both of them have striking similarities in the Avesta and in the Aryan scriptures. So, what exactly is the truth? If earlier there was no similarity, now again there is similarity, what are we supposed to believe? Okay. Both in the Veda and the Avesta, the picture of the gods is primarily that of an heroic Aryan warrior riding in a chariot drawn by powerful steeds. Okay. Image worship is equally unknown in the Avesta and in the Aryan scriptures. So there was no exactly image worship. Okay. Let's see. The Nasatyas, who also appear in the Avestas, though as a demon like Indra, and even the minor Vedic god is represented in Avesta by a god of the same name. So there are striking similarities between the gods of the Iranians, or rather I would say, Zoroastrians, because Iran as a name also did not exist during the time that we are talking about. So there was striking similarities between the gods of the Zarathustrians and the Aryans. In Veda, Yama, the son of Vivasvat, is the ruler of the dead. In Avesta, Yima, the son of Vivanhant, is the ruler of the paradise. So there are striking resemblances and similarities. I will put my faith behind the theory that all these learnings moved from its original Aryan homeland, that is Bharat, and then it migrated westwards. There is no conclusive evidence to believe otherwise. No matter how hard the West tries to confuse you, do not get confused, because this is the product. If you read R.C. Majumdar's book, you are bound to get confused. Okay, and that is the whole purpose of keeping us confused and to not let us reclaim our rightful identity. Again, R.C. Majumdar writes further in his book on page number 227. So long as it was believed that Gathas, because oldest in language, give also the oldest picture of the Aryan civilization of Iran, it was by no means possible to see that the society described in the Veda and the Avesta is essentially the same. But it has now been fully established that the civilization of the Gathas is a later reformed civilization of Iran. So now suddenly we see that even prior to Zarathustra coming forward and reforming the crude set of principles that the Iranians, for the lack of a better word, Iranians followed at that time. Okay, so now it is also established that prior to that there were also people existing. Okay, and prior to the civilization of Gathas there were also people. So, like I said, a deck of a palace of cards, lies upon lies upon lies. So the more you try to crumble it, you'll see that there are more layers beneath. This is again from the same paragraph on page number 227, but it has now been fully established that the civilization of the Gathas is a later reformed civilization of Iran, of which a much older phase is reflected in the Yastas, particularly the so-called heathenish Yastas, that is the Yasts, which have suffered least from Zarathustrian revision. Okay, so prior to Zarathustra, the individual who reformed the religion of the Parsis. Okay, prior to that, there were also people living. All right, and those people were called Yastas, and they are described by R.C. Majumdar in his book as heathens, meaning non-believers. So it is safe, I would say, to realize that this is the inception of the idea of the other. Okay, so far, the idea of somebody who is, you know, not similar to you, I would say, somebody who is not as one as you, I've not seen in this book at least. So this is the first time they are mentioning somebody as a heathen, somebody who is, okay. Yeah, I'm just going to put another fact side by side is Parsis, they have the oldest monotheistic religion. Okay, they are probably and perhaps almost certainly older than the Jews. All right. So we don't know. That is the interesting fact about history. You cannot be certain. It is what you believe and what majority of the people believe that makes it to be true. Okay, the Persian religion of the Achaemenian age, as described by the Herodotus, agrees not at all well with that of the Gathas, but shows significant points of similarity with the Aryan religion. When I say Aryan religion, I mean religion or the collective principles that originated natively and organically in the geography of Bharat. Okay, you cannot start reading history by conceding that no, we agree that Bharat is not the original Aryan homeland. You have to study history based on the belief that indeed Bharat was the original Aryan homeland. And then the burden of proof must be on the West to convince us that our core belief is incorrect. Okay. So yes, R.C. Majumdar, he writes that the Persian religion of the Achaemenian age, as described by Herodotus, does not agree at all with the Gathas. Okay. Now again, an anomaly in history. Herodotus was one Greek philosopher and a historian, and the Persian religion in the Achaemenian age that he describes in his works is completely different from the religion that is described in the Gathas. Okay, and what Herodotus describes has striking similarities with the Aryan faith of Bharat. Something for you to think about. Okay, and one very interesting thing, you might have heard this, and it is a common general knowledge question, that how do the Parsis get rid of their dead? Okay, the first time you learn this fact about they putting up their dead bodies in at the top of a building, and they let vultures and eagles feast on the bodies. Okay, that discovery might have been very interesting to you, that oh, these things also happen. But what if I tell you that this practice does not have an inherent or organic origin in the Parsi religion? They also have adopted it from somebody else. Okay, so before Zarathustra reformed the Zoroastrian faith, and then people started existing as a monotheistic faith, and there was homogeneity in the society, the people who existed in the land that we today call as Iran were known as Medes. Okay, there were a group of tribes, and amongst that group of tribes, there was another tribe that goes by the name of Magis. Okay, now these Magis, there were priests, and those were the people who started this practice of laying down the dead in the open and let the birds feast, and that is from where the Parsis have adopted this practice. Okay, so R.C. Majumdar, he concludes this chapter by this sentence: the ancient Aryan culture of Iran was thus hardly distinguishable from the ancient Aryan culture of Bharat. So there is no difference. If at all, there are minor differences here and there. Okay, there is no major difference between the Aryan culture of Iran. Again, Iran as a word did not exist during the time that we are talking about, but since we have no other word, okay, we face a similar difficulty with the word India as well. Okay, but I tend to use the word Bharat, and so the ancient Aryan culture of Iran thus is hardly distinguishable from the ancient Aryan culture of Bharat, and that is as it should be, for both were derived from one and the same Indo-Iranian culture. Right? Now we move on to chapter number 12. Okay, here chapter number 12 is a good primer for somebody who, you'll see that people in our country have this habit, and they do this very frequently. Whenever in an argument they would want to convince you about something, they will say that, oh, this has been mentioned somewhere in the Vedas, this has been mentioned somewhere in the Smritis and our scriptures. Okay, it's not that simple. All right, the first problem that we face is the hard copies that have survived after centuries of plunder and marauding are translations of the commentaries that some authors had did on the original texts. Okay, so to give you an example, okay, let's say there was an original manuscript of the Samhitas of the Rig Samhita. Rig Ved is, I don't know, like I said in the initial part of this video, I'm not really sure of the etymology of the word that is Ved or Vedas, so I stick to calling it as Rig Samhita. Okay, so let's say there was an original manuscript of Rig Samhita. There were some authors who wrote a commentary on those Rig Samhitas. Okay, and then there were people or scholars who translated the commentaries of those Rig Samhitas. So currently the hard copies that survive are those translations of the commentaries of the Rig Samhita. We do not have the original scriptures. Okay, so that makes you wonder what exactly was it that burnt in the libraries of Nalanda and Gandharva. So that makes you want to wonder. Okay, these were deliberate attempts to keep us away from our rightful identity. Okay, so let's navigate this labyrinth of the literature and the Samhitas during those times. Okay, so let's see in the very first paragraph in chapter number 12 on page number 229, R.C. Majumdar says, Rig Samhita is neither an historical nor an heroic poem, but mainly a collection of hymns by a number of priestly families, recited or chanted by them with appropriate solemnity at sacrifice to the gods. Okay, so this is simply just a collection of hymns. Nobody exactly made an effort to sit down and compile all those hymns in one book and then name it as Rig Veda. Okay, we do not have words to define these things, so we'll stick to our native vernaculars, that is Rig Samhita. Rig Samhita meaning a collection of hymns. That is what it is. It is not a historical account, it is not a poem. It is simply just hymns that were used as a chant during the sacrifice to the gods. Okay, we don't exactly know what these hymns stand for. There are translations in English as well, but you really have to learn Sanskrit and read it in that language to really appreciate the beauty of it. Because there is a lot of loss in translation. Okay. Further in that paragraph, R.C. Majumdar mentions, for the history of the Indian people, again a misnomer, because you're talking about history, or you're talking about a historical time point during which this word does not exist. So you cannot use that word to depict that people. Okay. For the history of the Aryan people of the Vedic age, I'm correcting it. It is written Indian people over here, but I'm correcting it as Aryan people. So for the history of the Aryan people of the Aryan age, the Atharva Veda is certainly the most important and interesting of the four Samhitas, describing as it does the popular beliefs and superstitions of the humble folk, and yet only partly subjugated by the Brahmanism. Okay. Yes. So those were collections of hymns. There are also parts. Okay, there are also parts in Rig Veda. Rig Samhita. Rig Samhita is written in mandalas. There are separate parts. Basically, they are hymns. Okay. On page number 230, he writes, all the hymns accepted into the Samhita must have possessed intrinsic ritual significance at the time of their acceptance. So like I said, we always had an oral tradition. Okay. So how many years prior to being written down did, so just to make you imagine the time scale. Okay, it was the Rig Samhita was compiled and written down in, let's say, let's be conservative. There are no exact dates over here, but let's say 1600 or 1700 BC. Let's be a conservative, let's say 2000 BC. So, how many years prior to that would you think somebody would have, because it takes centuries and centuries of trial and error to come up with these chantings. And now in the contemporary era, science has proven that indeed Sanskrit chanting of these hymns is beneficial to your head or to your brain or the brain neural paths. Okay, so this cannot be a coincidence. Do you think the people or the Aryans who came up with these chantings, they were unaware of the tangible benefits that these chantings have on your neural pathways? So if you believe that they were not aware, then I would say you are a useful idiot and an ignorant. Okay, so I am operating with the firm belief that yes, they knew, and it was deliberately, okay, these chants were deliberately crafted in a way for them to benefit them mentally in their neural paths. Okay, so to come up with something that is so much beneficial to you mentally and physically, it would have required centuries and centuries of trial and error. So how many years prior to actually being written down would they have come up with this thing? Okay, so it's something for you to ponder about. I mean, you do not just simply accept the research of the West on the face of it. Okay, let's see. Hymns were part of an elaborate ritual which gradually came to be regarded as capable not only of persuading but also of compelling gods to do the bidding of the officiating priests. Okay, so yeah, so gradually, people came about being convinced that these chantings, they're simply not just meaning of offering. These chantings will compel gods to do the bidding of the priests who are chanting. Okay, all right. On the other hand, there is nothing to tell us when the task of collecting the hymns into a Samhita was started, like I mentioned. Okay, so you'll have to really be, careful when you think about these things. And when you can visualize and picture the time scale over which these chantings would have evolved and proved to be useful to the Aryans, and then again further centuries of trial and error, then further somebody deciding to put it down in writing when they were fully convinced that now they are ready. Okay, so when you imagine that time scale and try to reconcile with the time scales that are given by the West in terms of Aryan migration theory and all those Indo-Iranian migrations, does it make sense to you? That I will leave it to you, to your better judgment. Most of the hymns were not composed as such, but were mechanically manufactured out of the fragments of floating anonymous literature, and the process of manufacturing hymns in this manner must have continued for a long time. So they are saying most of the hymns, they were not composed. They were simply mechanically manufactured. From what did they mechanically manufacture this? From the fragments of a floating anonymous literature. What is floating anonymous literature? So there was some content existing during that time. We'll have to assume oral. There was no other form in which you could manufacture content. There was only oral form. Okay, floating anonymous literature in the form of, so this was all mechanical reconstruction from already existing oral traditions. Now, how far back in time before being written down were these oral traditions, perfected through the method of trial and error? Something for you to think. It is impossible to imagine, however, any stage in the development of the Rig Samhita at which a demand for new mantras was not present, for the ritual in which they were intended to be used was all the time growing in complexity and expanding in range, and therefore demanding new mantras at every step. Okay, so there was this constant demand. Now that we have discussed, there was this widespread belief among the people that the chanting of so and so mantras could compel the gods to do the bidding of the priests who were chanting. So there was more and more demand. Okay, any priest who could come up with an you know elegant mantras was in high demand, and this acted as an incentive for the priestly class to come up with new mantras. So hence there was constant demand, and I would say there also has to be constant supply. Hence, Rig Samhita has more than 1,000 hymns, and we don't exactly know. Some of the hymns that were already present over there might not have made it to Rig Samhita for reasons we cannot imagine as well, because we don't have enough bricks to make the wall, to use that metaphor. Okay, next is, so like I said, Rig Samhita, it exists in mandalas in the form of chapters for you to understand. The 10th mandala is manifestly a later addition, often Atharvanic in character, yet not so late that the few Pavamana hymns originally belonging to it could not be transferred to the 9th mandala. So there were also some later additions. Okay, we don't exactly know who added them, why were they added at a later stage, but there were later additions. Okay, so there were people who were conscious about the fact that indeed these things have to be preserved. This is something that is beneficial to the upcoming descendants of the Aryans. Somebody thought of it. Somebody thought about adding these hymns to the book that today we like to call as Rig Samhita. So somebody was conscious about the fact that there is a threat to the way of life that we have come up with. This manifestly beautiful, this manifestly elegant and graceful way of life that they had come up with, there are bound to be threats to it, and hence this had to be added. Each family mandala opens with a group of hymns dedicated to Agni, immediately followed by another group addressed to Indra. All right. So yes, there are also later additions. Then comes the Sam Samhita. People like to call it as Samved, but like I mentioned, I don't know, the definition of this word Ved. So we'll come to it later. So Sam Samhita, it is more about. But what is interesting to know is, majority of the literary content in Samveda is same as Rig Samhita. Then what was the rationale behind writing, Sam Samhita? Why would somebody simply just, copy what was written in Rig Samhita and declare it a new text? There has to have been some value addition. And that value addition was in the term of melodies. Okay, in the Rig Samhita, the hymns, they were simply just chanted. But when we come to Sam Samhita, these chantings were done in the form of a melody. This is the beginning of an era of music. Okay, there is no parallel or contemporary civilization who has existing evidence for the beginning of the idea of music. There is only one civilization, and we all know which that civilization is. And we have Sam Samhita that proves beyond doubt that this was the civilization that invented the conception of the idea of music. Okay, so yes, there will be Westerners who will say, oh, Sam Samhita is merely a plagiarized version of Rig Samhita. Yes, it is, but there was some value addition that you fail to see, because you are blinded by this idea and bias of racial superiority. Is that the thing that you fail to see is there was a value addition of melody, of song, of music. Okay. Here, the text part of the Sam Samhita serving merely the purpose of musical notes, every melody could theoretically be chanted on every verse. So this was the value addition. Now, next time somebody asks you that majority of the hymns that are there in the Sam Samhita is very similar to Rig Samhita, tell them that there was a value addition of music. Earlier they were simply just chanted. Now, after coming off the Sam Samhita, they had to be sung in a certain melody. Okay, because this is what our history textbooks will tell us. It is of no literary value. All the other successive samhitas that have come out after Rig Samhita were simply just plagiarized version of Rig Samhita, and hence it has no inherent value. That's not true. There was some inherent value. There was value addition. Okay. Next up comes the Yajur Samhita. It deals with the practice of the priests who deal with the sacrificial practices. So it has all of that. There is Yajur Samhita. He details it. R.C. Majumdar has included details about each of the Samhitas. What are the divisions? What are the chapters? But again, that is beyond the scope of this video, obviously. So we are going to quickly touch upon each of them. In the Yajur Samhita, language in this case fails to provide a dependable criterion, for in spite of inevitable unimportant linguistic peculiarities of each, all of them may be said to speak in the same language. Okay, like I said, again, there will be people who will question that. Again, majority of the content that has been taken in the Yajur Samhita comes from the Rig Samhita. And what exactly is the purpose? There has to be. Just because we don't know it currently doesn't mean there wasn't in the first place. Okay. So, yep. Again, there is the Atharva Samhita. Now, there is considerable, disagreement amongst the scholars. Is Atharva Samhita really one of the four previously, one of the three, that is the Rig, Sam and Yajur Samhitas? Should Atharva also be given the same standing with all the previous three Samhitas? There is considerable debate. We can discuss that in the other videos. But right now, for our academic purpose, we can simply assume that yes, the Atharva Samhita was also parallel in standing with the previous three. Here there is significant differences. You can see, okay, now there was synthesis of new thought coming in, because whenever there is cultural stagnation, a civilization has to come up with improvements on its own. Alright, there has to be some churning of the intellectual thought from within, and that churning should bring out some new thoughts, and that is what Atharva Samhita did, because there are significant divergences from the ideas and principles of the previous three Samhitas. Okay. All right. The Brahminical ritual gradually extended its sway over superstition. Yep. So all there, it's all written in this book. R.C. Majumdar has been very cautious speaking about things. Next up is the Brahmanas. Okay, what exactly are the Brahmanas? Who exactly are the Brahmanas? The priestly class that has been, they have been considered as devils of the society. They have been considered as somebody who keeps people as downtrodden. Who exactly are these people? We don't exactly know. Okay, but the word Brahmanas, they connote to the literature of the commentary that was written on the Samhitas. That is what that word means. All right. So Brahmanas, their ritual text, sole object of their authors was to speculate on the Vedas. That was the sole purpose. Okay. All that is found in the Brahmanas that is not directly concerned with rituals is, strictly speaking, irrelevant and unnecessary from the viewpoint of their authors. Okay. That is what R.C. Majumdar writes. So there are, to each of the Samhitas, there are attached Brahmanas as well. The commentaries on those Samhitas. So they were basically literary texts, nothing else. Commentaries upon the Samhitas. Then came the Shrutis and the Sutras, the Srota Sutras. Okay. Again, there are no clear lines of distinctions. Meaning, is this text supposed to be called a Brahmana? Is this text supposed to be called a Shruti? Is this text supposed to be called a Shruta? There are no clear lines of distinction. They are all a part of a single Aryan scriptures. That is all there is. Next, that is all for this video. In the next chapter, we'll focus on chapter number 13, that is titled Aryan settlements in Bharat. All right, that's all for this video. Thank you for watching.